Former State Senator Mike Johnston, if you are sitting there and I am sitting here, that probably means that you are running for Denver mayor.
That does turn out to be true. That is why I'm here.
Let's talk about one area where you think that Denver needs a pretty drastic change in approach.
Yeah, I think one area we need a drastic change in approach is what we're doing around the issues with homelessness. I think what we've seen is this is a major crisis that the city hasn't been able to solve yet, but we also know this is a crisis that is very solvable. I've had the chance to work over the last 3 years as the head of the foundation here, and we focus entirely on helping families and kids get access to opportunity, and one of the things we've spent a lot of time on is homelessness and housing. And we ran a pilot where we worked with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless to be able to provide permanent supportive housing for folks to get off the streets and into housing. And 86% of those folks a year later were actually in housing and stayed there. What we're missing right now is we don't actually have the housing units to put people into. So you can provide all the wraparound services you want. If you don't actually have a housing unit to place that person in, you can't solve that problem. That's one of the reasons why we led and passed Proposition 123, is that actually helps provide the resources to these local communities you'll need to be able to build the actual units. Once we build the units, I know we can provide the services to help get those folks the support they need.
Let's talk about how specifically you build the units, because the city is kind of nibbling away at this in various ways. They're buying hotels on Colfax, they're looking for some unused motel rooms, they're incentivizing some affordable units. How do you do it on the scale that's needed?
Yeah, so there's about 1,200 people who are chronically homeless right now at any point in time. What you do is you want to create a sense of community in small villages. So what you do is you take a half acre and you can put 40 or 60 tiny homes on a spot like that. Those are only $20,000 or so a piece. And what's important is you're also then moving people with a sense of community. Right now, folks that are unhoused, that is often the only community they have. So if you're going to come and try to pull one person out of that community and move them, they're very unlikely to go. When you can come and move an entire block of 20 or 30 people to a new neighborhood that has running water, has electricity, has housing, has addiction support services and mental health and workforce training, that is a real strategy. So I think you want to look at how you can do in small sections those kind of tiny home communities. You can also do apartments, you can also do hotels, but I think the long-term strategy is you want to have small neighborhoods like the neighborhoods that exist now, but they're with targeted resources and they're with real homes people can live in.
So that's the Colorado Village Collaborative approach that they've been working on. Would you suggest that the city take over those programs, that become a city program, just provide them a lot more support? How do you see that working?
I think the city can partner with nonprofits that are doing great work at this. I think the city also has to be a better partner in actually getting the permits approved to get those units built. That's been one of the challenges, is being able to get permits approved through the city to be able to get things up and running. But I think the city doesn't have to own all these. They have to be the partner in providing space. Oftentimes it's next to a transit-oriented development spot, or it's next to a human services delivery location, which helps. So you can help pick the locations, you can help partner with the land, but you can help find the nonprofits who are doing great work on this and provide the resources for them to scale solutions that we know work.
There's been a lot of debate over whether Denver's homeless sweeps are legal. My question for you would be, do you see them as morally justifiable?
I think, well, I thought you were going to ask, are they effective? Because right now it's clear that they're also not effective. I think that it is immoral to not have a place for everyone who lives in Denver to be able to sleep in a home. And I think the first step is we have to make sure we can provide that housing opportunity for all the people in Denver. We've failed to do that. And so when you're pushing people out, all you're doing is pushing them down the block to the next place that they can find a spot to stay for the night. What we ought to do to meet our moral obligation is actually make sure that there are units available for them to move to, and those units have the services those folks need. When you can do that, then I think it's a very fair ask to say, let's move you to a place that's more humane for you and more humane for the city.
So that sounds like you'd be comfortable with the sweep approach continuing if every person who was being asked to move had a guaranteed spot, a safe place to go.
Yeah, I think our first obligation is to make sure we can actually provide houses for people to stay in, whether those are tiny homes, whether those are mobile homes, whether those are apartments, whether those are rental units. We've never been able to do that before. Once we can, what we found is people have the myth that folks don't want to move off the streets and into housing. They do. This is why our project showed that 86% take the offer to go, they go, and they stay. And so I think that's the myth we can dispel by actually providing those units and providing those services, is folks want something better. They just want a sense of community and they want some stability.
How do you deal with the next step in the affordable housing crisis, which is folks who might be housing insecure but are not homeless? How does Denver add the units necessary? What role does density play in that? What do you think about the cities that have dropped single-family zoning to encourage a lot more density?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I spent the last 2 years working on Proposition 123, which was a strategy to provide resources to local communities to be able to solve this problem and to solve the whole continuum. Yes, to focus on people that are unhoused, but also to focus on people that are working 60 hours a week and still not making enough money to pay the rent in the current structure. And what that means is we have to build permanently affordable housing units that are affordable to people at all range of income. And so what that would mean under Proposition 123 is you never pay more than 30% of what you're making. And so if you're a first-year teacher and you're making $40,000 a year, that means you're never paying more than $12,000 a year in rent. That's $1,000 a month in rent, and those rents can't go up unless your income goes up. When you do that, you can actually help Denver stay a city that's home for everybody, where you can have teachers and nurses and firefighters that can afford to raise kids in the city limits here. But if you don't do that, you're going to quickly see this become a city that's unaffordable to most people that want to serve the city.
What role does density play in affordable housing?
I think density is a very important part of affordable housing. We want to be able to build for density. That also helps on transit. We want to be able to build next to transit-oriented development sites. People don't need cars more and more often. But we also want density that preserves the feeling of what Denver is. I don't know that we need 60-story skyscrapers in City Park, but you do want to be able to be thoughtful about providing density and about providing mixed income housing developments, where yes, you have folks that are at 30% of area median income who might be making $30,000 a year, and you have market rate units at the same site. But I think that's the kind of integrated Denver people want to have, which is one that we can build.
Denver's kind of been easing into this with doing ADUs kind of neighborhood by neighborhood, not even willing to do a citywide approach to second units on the same property.
Yeah.
Are we moving with appropriate speed and urgency toward the goal of adding housing units?
I don't think we're moving with the speed and urgency we need. Right now we know we're about 50,000 affordable units short in Denver, and if we don't do that at a much more rapid pace, you're going to see the city start to hollow out. I mean, people will now share the data that San Francisco has the fewest number of kids of any city in America because it's just not affordable anymore for families to live there. We can't afford to wait 5 or 10 years to be able to do that. I think we could build another 25,000 units in the next 8 years that would cut that problem in half and could actually guarantee those people affordable units that would stay affordable.
You'll hear a lot of critics of Denver point to San Francisco as where they think the city is trending towards. When you look at cities led by progressives like San Francisco or Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, do you see well-intentioned approaches to tough problems, or do you see failures of overreach and kind of progressive policies when you look at those cities?
I don't think I know anybody that tries to run a city that's not well-intended. I don't think they want to run their cities into the ground. I don't think they want negative outcomes for families. I just think what's clear is that the strategies they're using have not worked. And so what you want to do is say, what are the strategies that are going to work? And that means you have to be able to both build and convert housing stock to be permanently affordable. You have to be able to provide permanent supportive housing to folks who are homeless with the wraparound services. And you have to be able to keep your city safe and be able to provide people the kind of security in every neighborhood they want to feel. And I think people want that sense of security. I just think the policies people have attempted have been misguided.
That was a bit of talk about housing affordability and homelessness, but you brought that up first as one of the things you wanted to talk about, and it's something I want to talk about as well. Let's talk about policing. Mm-hmm. Denver spends a good amount of money on public safety.
Yeah.
Do you think the amount we're spending on public safety is about right, too much, too little?
I think the bigger question is how you spend the amount of money that we spend. We're spending about $600 million a year. That's a significant amount. I think that there are different ways for us to approach the way that we do policing. I think one of the things that people really want is they want the feeling of being protected. They don't always want the feeling of being policed, and so I think what you want to think about is how can you think differently about the kind of support we can provide to communities. You think about the medical world now, not every person sees a doctor when you walk in. There are physician's assistants or nurses that do early level interventions. I think I'd love to see us do something in Denver that would look like a safety force, which is you might have 200 officers that are in downtown Denver that are not uniformed. They might be in bright yellow jerseys or bright yellow red jerseys that show they are recognizable. You can go to them for safety. They're post certified. They can make arrests, but they also are on foot and they can talk to people. They can answer questions. That's a person that you can reach out to if you are feeling unsafe. And you have those people in high traffic areas at times that we know are dangerous. And I think there are ways we can do a lot more on the prevention side. We know we can use things like mental health courts and drug courts and gun courts to intervene with people early on before they get deep into the criminal justice system to redirect their path. There are things we can do even farther upstream, like how are we making sure kids have someplace positive to go after school every day before they're at risk for system involvement. And so I think it's about a deliberate strategy of the entire continuum of public safety and how you use dollars wisely at every stage to make sure people feel safe but not overly policed.
I want to ask you about that idea of a downtown safety force. Those folks would be not in law enforcement uniforms with the thought that they'd be more approachable. Would they also be unarmed?
I think they would be. I think they might be armed with a concealed weapon. They might have the ability to arrest someone, but what they are not is it doesn't have a militarized feel where they're in full uniform with flak jackets and entire belts and vests. What you have would be people who could intervene and solve a problem, and if there's a situation that requires significant intervention, they could call for more backup. But you have a first line, if you will, of people who can be able to solve a lot of the low-level issues that happen when you're downtown at Union Station in the basement waiting for a bus, or if you're on the 16th Street Mall at night trying to walk to and from dinner. I think we want this to feel like a place where you can take your kids downtown and you're excited to let them run and play on the piano on the 16th Street Mall. I don't think people have that feeling right now, but I think that's a feeling you want to have without feeling like you're walking through North Korea and there's every guard is carrying an AR-15 next to you. I think there's a way to do both.
And you had said you thought these folks would be post-certified like other law enforcement officers. So it wouldn't be like Denver's civilian enforcement team for homelessness issues. These would not be civilians. These would be trained officers, just with a different approach.
With a different approach and with different training. I mean, it's also interesting to think about what the face of law enforcement is. You know, right now, 50% of our law schools and 50% of our med schools are women entering right now. We ought to shoot to have 50% of our law enforcement also be women. That represents the balance of the city. People that are the faces and voices you grew up with and you know and see in your neighborhoods. And so, and are trained really with their focus being on how do you develop skills to de-escalate rather than to escalate. When I was a teacher and a school principal, the trick you got to learn is how do you run into a 15-year-old who's really angry and wants to fight, and how do you de-escalate them? There are oftentimes in law enforcement where your training is the opposite, is to bring a show of force as opposed to bring the capacity to de-escalate situations that are hostile. I think those are things that we can screen for, we can train for, and we can develop people's capacity to be better at.
A lot of your career as a school teacher, principal, state senator, and then your work in the nonprofit world has been around the idea of giving kids opportunities and lifting kids out of poverty. What's a big, bold thing that the force of the city could do that other organizations can't on that?
I think a big one is, what we know right now is the majority of kids' learning time and growing time they spend outside of the school day. They spend after school and in summertime. And we know if we don't do things to support kids in that space, you'll see the gaps continue to widen between kids in this community. And so I think one big idea is we want to be able to allow all kids in the city access to the kind of after-school programs that my kids are able to access, whether that's music, whether that's art, whether that's tutoring. And I think we were working with the city of Denver on a pilot called My Spark to try to do that. But I think the opportunity there is if this could be a city where every kid knows they have someplace positive to go, they can pursue their passion, find a spark for them. I think that helps them get down the path to saying, hey, here are the things I want to pursue, here are my dreams. And that keeps you out of some of the tougher decisions you make. But this is, I think the city has a big role in what the lived experience of being a kid is in Denver right now. And I think there's a lot more we can do.
I want to ask you some questions about politics. Over the summer, Denverites were polled on whether they thought that Mayor Michael Hancock was doing a good job, and only about a quarter of them said they thought he was doing a good or excellent job. Are you in that quarter that thinks the mayor's doing a good job?
Oh, I think the last 3 years have been a very hard run on everybody in the country. The pandemic was not easy. I think when you think back to where the city was 12 years ago when the mayor started, I think there are some major successes to celebrate. I mean, obviously he has, I think, turned this into a world-class city in many ways. The airport's now, I think, the third busiest airport in the world. You have real critical investments he's made in equity around things like women and minority-owned businesses. I think now we face a different set of challenges that we are a world-class city because you have world-class problems, and those include some of the things that are front and center right now, like homelessness, like affordable housing, like crime. And so I think those are problems the next mayor is really going to have to be able to solve. But I think the mayor has carried us a long way in the last 12 years.
That same polling by a progressive group called Emerge Colorado, whose director, Dr. Elisa Calderon, is actually now running for mayor as well, found that a majority of Denverites surveyed are interested in the opportunity to vote for a woman for mayor. Denver's never had a woman mayor. And the field this year has more high-profile female candidates than we've ever seen before, including women of color. Why do you feel like it's your turn and not theirs?
I think there are a couple things that matter a lot. The first is we know that you have to be able to build and lead diverse teams to be able to run complex organizations. I've done that at every stage of my career, from a school principal up to the organization I've ran. So we'll have an incredibly diverse set of voices that help lead the city. But I also think the big question people will ask is kind of, who do you work with and who do you work for? And what have you spent your career doing? I'm very proud of the fact of who I've spent my career working for has been those communities in Denver that have been most likely to have been left behind. Whether it was as a teacher and principal in my 20s, supporting kids in alternative schools, whether it was serving in the state senate in Northeast Denver, representing a lot of black and brown communities who felt like their voices weren't being heard. They chose me because they thought I could be an effective voice for the things they cared about. I think the biggest question folks are going to ask is, who do they believe is going to be able to work for them and to deliver results for them? I think it's fantastic that we have such a diverse field. That's what you want to have. And now the voters get to choose who is the best person for the job in front of the city right now, which is who is a person who has a track record of taking on the biggest problems, of being able to put together detailed plans for those, and being able to deliver historic results. I think I'm unique in this field as someone who's had a track record of doing that in every different sector that the city faces.
I want to close with a similar question, but might lead us to a slightly different answer. As the voters of Denver look at you, listen to your ideas, what do you say to voters who might think, like this Mike Johnston guy, straight white guy, grew up in Vail, went to Yale, he's got a good paying job. What does he know about what my life is like, what my challenges are like?
Yeah.
Somebody who grew up or has a different lived experience than you.
Yeah. I mean, I've spent my entire adult life serving Denver in different capacities over the last 30 years. In my 20s as a school principal, 30s as a state senator, with an office in the Holly in one of the neighborhoods that's been struggling more than anyone. There every day for folks to walk in the door and tell us what their challenges were and how we could resolve them. Whether it was as a principal serving communities of immigrants, they were recent immigrants from Mexico or Guatemala, or fighting for dreamers to get access to college. I think I've spent my career shoulder to shoulder with people who feel like their voices are not heard in City Hall or in the places where decisions are made. And so I'm very proud of the fact that I've committed my life to that, and I'm very proud of the fact that there's a real diverse coalition of people around the city who would say they feel like I've been their voice in a very effective way.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.